morning, good afternoon, and good evening to many of you. We welcome you to our first joint session of Gallerists who have come together to walk you through our fifth edition of In Touch. It's not rare for gallerists to converge and create close friendships. We have common goals, common issues, and certainly common interests. But when a pandemic occurs, this particular constituency world over have converged in ways that have been unprecedented. We ideate, we create new spaces for discourse, and in doing so, a platform like In Touch was born out of that need to share art, ideas, and practices. It started with one gallerist talking to another, and soon it turned to 10, and then 12, and then at one point, even 15 galleries. It followed in some sense an art fair model that the founder gallerist chose others, and in doing that, created a certain homogeneity in which gallery presentations were able to speak, one gallery presentation was able to speak to another from one edition to another. In order that we expand our viewership, we extended the platform by inviting our colleagues from Dubai, some of who continued and some of who dropped off. But that really is the spirit and nature of the platform, its fluidity and yet a cohesiveness that binds us together. Owing to the tentacles that each gallery has, it was important that In Touch was always a sharing of our online exhibitions at any given time, shared PDFs, shared websites, and shared information on inquiries from one gallery to another. In times like this, one comes to realize that being together is not only important, but generative for many of us. And for many of us, In Touch became more than a selling platform, because when gallery directors and their teams relate and combine, new conversations arise. I'm grateful to all of you who have been part of this expedition. And while the pandemic continues to rage, our Zoom meetings will keep us together until such time that we will be able to engage with each other in normal circumstances. I now hand over to Mortimer Chatterjee of Chatterjee and Lal, who will speak about his solo exhibition by Nityan Unikrishnan.
Hi, my name is Tara Lal, and this is Mort Chatterjee.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in. I just need to tell everyone that if you have questions during my or anyone else's presentation, then please write that into the chat box, and we'll attend to those after we finish with the presentations. So it's a cruel fate for any artist to be summed up in 3 minutes, now 2.5 minutes. But nonetheless, here we go with Chatterjee and Lal's presentation. We're showing the work of Nityan Unikrishnan, who's an artist that we've been showing for the last 10 years. We've had 6 solo shows with Nityan. And we're presenting for In Touch a body of work that's never been seen before. Nityan was born in 1976, studied at NID, the National Institute of Design in Gujarat, has lived in Delhi, now lives in Goa. He works across 2D and 3D formats. In 2D, works on cloth, acrylics on cloth, and works on paper. And this body of work are paperworks. The series is called Short Notice. And you can see in these works, he really deploys his incredible skill and technique through the actions of stippling, cross-hatching. And so what we have are these group of characters, each of which is titled things like Migraine 1, Migraine 2, Superwoman. There's some hint of distress, angst, possibly existential angst. Nityan was very kind and actually gave me access to his sketchbooks, which he was making during the execution of this series. And it talks about the idea of the self, or the fragmented self, I should say. And I think in these characters, you can kind of see the way that he's constructed the self as a composite of many different aspects and many different parts. They teeter on the illustrative, and that's something that runs right through his practice. And I love the way that they sort of stand out and they pop out from on the paper itself. We chose these to show it in touch because we think they work very well as a group. But it's also important to point out that, of course, most of Nityan's work function within these larger constructs and these larger imagery of beings within landscapes and within townscapes. So these are quite an atypical group. So we would encourage everyone to look at the website, at our website, and have a look at other works which Nitya makes, just to give a larger context to his practice. Well, I hope you enjoy these works. I think that we've been through pretty much all of them. I think it is now my duty to hand over, well, I'm handing over back to Shireen, so Shireen gets double dipped. And with that, I will thank everyone. Thank you and bye.
Thanks, Mort. Kemold Prescott Road. We are happy to present this evening the work of Dhruvi Acharya. I start with a work that isn't in the exhibition, but it's a very, very important work to kind of link what she's doing to the present work. And I say this because artists are like sponges who absorb and react to situations in ways that have become unique in how life and circumstances are interpreted. This very powerful work by Dhruvi, which was done 4 years, about 4 years after the passing of her husband, who died of falling off a horse. She created this homage titled Once Was, Still Is, But Isn't. It's an installation with her daily drawings of 16 years they spent together, plastered all over the walls. And the room itself is a manifestation of their shared life. It's a soft cloth installation that you know, of their entire sort of shared memories. Making this work allowed her to breathe, to weep, but it also became a space which became completely cathartic, allowing her to get strength from her own art making. Now, the present body of
Shireen, you have to unmute yourself.
This present body of work, titled Elusive Recess, is in some sense similar. Our times are unprecedented. If the pandemic hadn't occupied all our senses, political upheavals, unrest, protests, crimes against minorities, women, environmental disasters, that have become a constant preoccupation with all of us and of course with Dhruvi, it has been an exhausting time. Dhruvi allowed and recognized her wandering mind and the elusive recesses within it to dominate her thoughts, as we often do, and also in doing so, trying to replace clarity with clutter in coming back to the drawing board in a way to give credence to actually draw out those thoughts, giving them form, shape, and color. When she works with ink and watercolor on paper, there isn't a preconceived idea or a plan of what the work is going to be about. When this series started a few months ago, reflecting on the state of the world and the state of her mind, it began with marks with ink and water, and then allowing the images to appear or disappear, letting water, letting the ink, and letting the pigments merge and flow. Making work on paper for Dhruvi is about being present in the moment, to guide the water, the color, and also allowing the medium to do its own thing, to respond to what is happening and sort of respond, letting her respond to the paper and the occurrence of the event at that point. And so those thoughts and emotions somehow manifest intuitively and aesthetically. So if there is a darkness that Dhruvi, you know, if there is some, you know, if thoughts emerge from this kind of dark time, I think what Dhruvi is able to draw is beauty. She's able to balance form, color, and it comes, I mean, form, color, and beauty really come naturally to her. So yeah, I mean, that's really the end of my presentation. I happily hand over now to Pratik and Priyanka from Experimenter Gallery to speak about their solo presentation by Prabhakar Pachpute.
Hi.
Thank you.
Are we visible on video? Not so sure.
Thank you, Shireen.
Thank you, Shireen. I'm Priyanka Raja. This is Pratik Raja. And we would be presenting a very beautiful body of work by Prabhakar Pachpute for this edition of In Touch. And I'd ask Pratik to take over and
Thank
speak
you.
about it.
So welcome everybody, and good evening to everyone who's joining us here, and then good afternoon, good morning to wherever people are joining us from. So the the exhibition that we're presenting online this edition of In Touch is a solo by Prabhakar Pachpute, which is titled Under the Crust. It continues his inquiry into the exploitation of land, of mineral resources, and kind of imagines the future of a post-mine, post-industrial landscape. The image that you see on your screen is a long panorama of the works. They are made with a vision to inhabit a space, a large immersive space, maybe. These works are painted on large wooden panels, sometimes larger than scale, and they come together as a monumental narrative. Prabhakar uses personal experiences, research, folklore, and are represented by the characters in his paintings, drawings and animations, and the sculptures that he makes. These works really confront the viewer with the pressures of economy on capital, on land, and really the works propose as much as a state of disarray. As you can see, there's a certain sense of imbalance and disarray as they indicate a chance of optimism. So the person reaching out to sow an anthill in this example. So the anthills become a kind of source of revolution or withstanding or resilience in a way. A precarious visual equilibrium really emerges to indicate a time that is at the precipice of change. So the characters really become part of the almost surreal landscape, and these wooden panels that are cut out come together to form this long narrative. Uh, Pachpute also envisions an afterlife of objects and animals. In this case, for example, this is called an asylum seeker, and it's probably a cow or a bull, but its head is fixed with a farm tool. Often farm tools and other objects embody the sculptures and drawings that he makes. Um, these these allow the viewer to think of an alternate legacy, and even calls to action for revolution, something that is very much in the present. Anamorphic figures of the machine, the human, and animal bodies try to walk together in this long procession. Um, the procession that we see can be seen as an interpretation of our failures, our desires, maybe our need to unite and stay together, but also makes us think about how we live our present and how we exploit or mistreat what is around us. So they're also complemented with a body of small works on paper. They're really Prabhakar's way of looking at his characters, and then also a couple of sculptures where he's using a lot of materials that are made from the ground. For example, this work called Moving Cities, it uses a wide range of materials, including clay and husk and cow dung, giving back to land what came from land, really. So yeah, that really brings us back to the end of our presentation, and I will be very proud and happy to introduce Ranjana from Gallerist Michandani and Steinrucker to take this up forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Ranjana?
Yes, I'm here. Do you hear me? I don't, wait a second. I think I need to turn my camera. Sorry. Hello, everybody. I'm Ranjana from Gallery Mirchandani Steinrucker. We are presenting for In Touch Edition 5, a set of 12 imperial-sized pen and ink drawings by the artist P.R. Satish. Satish was born in 1970 in Munnar, which is the mountainous region of Western Kerala. And he comes from a family of spice farmers. So really there was, they lived on the outskirts of a forest, and there was absolutely no chance to experience art. The only exposure came from his father, who was a spice farmer, but would make sketches and he would write. And there in the forest, he even started a small library, which was called Vandeep, or the Light of the Forest. And anyway, Satish was intrigued by the idea of art and went and studied at the art school in Trivandrum, after which he also lived in a number of cities in India, before then returning to Kerala to divide his time between the farm and his studio. And his studio is in Kochi, actually, in the coastal part of Kerala. So he divides his time between these two terrains. And when you look at some of these drawings, you see a kind of an automation and animation. So to me, it feels almost like they, could be from the hand of an inventor. You see kind of fantasy, flying dinosaurs and, wild animals. There's goriness. But if you look closely, there's really what you see is an overlapping of nature, of animals and humans and birds, and of course faces and bodies. But there are forms within forms. You discover more and more the closer you look. And Satish says for him, it's like a delving into memory, the way as a child that he had to negotiate this raw terrain, walk through the forest to get to school. And you can imagine how for a child that would really be quite an overwhelming experience. And that kind of precariousness and feeling of tumbling comes through, that kind of balance comes through, or seeking of a balance. So these are very personal notations. I mean, they really, what he does is to set aside any kind of information and to really, be intuitive and responsive to himself and his memory. That's it. Thank you very much. And I hand over now to Renu Modi from Gallery Espace.
Hello, everyone. We present here now two artists' works. One is Sharat Sonkhule and the other is Ishita Chakravarti. Both for the first time we are showing at In Touch. Both artists are exploring the nuances of black and white. Sharat Sonkhule, he comes from rural Maharashtra. His upbringing was all about, it was all spiritual, religious uh, practice which his family would do. So that spiritual practice still comes into his work quite a lot. He meditates a lot and it inspires him. Um, Sharad's um, whole approach to his work and his practice, it's very unique. He covers the first layer of on the canvas, it's all very dark black, which he calls it the universal void. And I look at it and I think it's really the Vedantic philosophy of the formless and the forms. And over it, he takes rice paper squares and he makes a grid, and then he very painstakingly he does his dots and dashes, which form a meandering pattern. Again, his deep love for music, and especially Dhrupad, and he sometimes takes the harmonium to his studio, and all the time whenever he paints, this music is always playing. Sharad is very comfortable with different scales, from very large to very small works he can do. This particular work, which you see, it's a very interesting work. The mm, the square, which you see in the center, the plus is actually it's when he says when he meditates, the more and more inside the internal of his internal what you call is, it just kind of expands. It's very meditative. And now I come to, can you change please? Ishita Chakravarti. She's a young artist who stays in Zurich but comes from Calcutta. She has a sense of alienation there in Zurich, in that very Eurocentric environment she lives in. She is doing a second master's there, and now she also goes to the School of Languages because she wants to learn German, and she's learning German there. At the coffee shop there, she meets immigrants from Pakistan, Afghanistan, Mali, Turkey, and also a lot of displaced migrants are also there. She hears their stories of loss and longing, violence, and she connects with the sense of alienation because of her own alienation. Her work evolves from deep listening to the oral histories of these displaced migrants. Since 2017, she has been working on these drawings, which I'm showing, and she calls them a memory drawing project. It is a scratch paper technique to preserve memoirs and memories through these inkless drawings, she says. And she inscribes words and images. For her, all these scratches which she makes on the paper, she says that these are like scars of the the scars which are left even when the wounds heal. She's a multidisciplinary artist who works in paper, ceramics, installations, video, and sound. And I finish my presentation over here, and I hand over now to Isabel of Gallery IVDE.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Can you hear me? Yes? Okay, so we are very pleased to present for the 5th edition of In Touch, the work of Latif Alani. He's an Iraqi photographer born in 1935, which makes him today 86 years old. His work has somehow been rediscovered just recently in 2015 when he was presented, his work photos were presented in the Iraqi pavilion at the Venice Biennale. He, in the meantime, had a solo show at the SMAC, a museum in Ghent, in Belgium, and also a retrospective at the Sharjah Art Foundation. And back in 2015, those images provoked many reactions, especially amongst people, Iraqi people themselves, because they had never seen these their country through this image in that state, and they will probably also never see these images in Iraq again. And this is actually in light of the modern history and the tragic history of the country that went through revolution, that went through colonization, the Ba'ath Party, the Iran-Iraq war, and finally the the two Gulf War. But during this tragic event, there's been a period of hope and prosperity between 1950 and 1970. And that is exactly the period that Latif Alani is documenting in his images. And back at that time, he was working for the Iraq Petroleum Company. And his mission was to capture the impact of oil exploitation and its impact on urbanization, on the modernization of the country, the schools, education, industrialization. He even had the opportunity to take aerial shots of Baghdad, the beautiful archaeological sites, and the palm groves all have been bombed to ease visibility during bombing. That's in between bracket information. And so he was documenting and photographing intensively his country during these almost 30 years. And when tension with Iran raised and freedom was limited by Saddam Hussein regime, he took a very radical decision, which was to put down his camera and never take a photo again. He radically refused to document the social decay and cultural deterioration of his country. And I think this is an unprecedented decision in the history of photography. And in the meantime, all his work has been lost. It had been destroyed during the 2003 invasion. They were held at the Ministry of Information and Communication, where he was working. He was the head of photography there. And what we see is actually his personal archive. If this is it, I'm happy to pass the presentation to Sunita from Gallerist.
Hi, and thank you, Isabel. So I'm today. I'm going to talk about Sunil Padwal's work. I met Sunil Padwal in 2014 in Sudarshan Shetty's kitchen. And that evening, Sunil proceeded to very casually show us a box of drawings. Of course, I was very intrigued and requested a studio visit. And then I went to the studio, which was in Lower Parel East in Bombay. And this is an area in which Sunil has lived for most of his life and worked. So when you went up to the studio, you first encountered a very simple white door. And it was located in what seemed like an old neighborhood. As I walked into the studio, there was music playing, and the entire space seemed like an extension of his work. From the books in his collection, to the objects, to the pieces of furniture that he and his wife had designed. And it really was one of the best studio visits that I had. I was first drawn to the draftsmanship when it came to his drawings, and then noticed his compulsive collecting of objects, of old frames, found photos, and he also took photos himself around his neighborhood. And all this came together in many layers that he used to make his works. The frames were very much part of the work, and they didn't just serve a functional purpose. The frames could in themselves have contained documentation of somebody's tax registration certificate. It could have been newspaper clippings or even photographs of elders that people framed in the chawls in that side of Lower Parel that Sunil lived in. So he chooses to leave these things in the frames, and sometimes he also uses them as part of the image. Sunil is constantly looking at the city and the remnants of a collective and personal history, reusing objects, documents, and photos that have been discarded to create a new narrative in the present. All these works, these three works that I have chosen to show today, are new and haven't been shown before. So the first one, which is on the screen now, is probably the work that is closest in spirit to the work that he showed in 2016 at the Kochi Biennial, called A Room of Lies. The work comprised of 650 frames and 70 odd objects. And I think to this date, it happens to be the most important work for me in his practice. So we can go to the details in this work now. And, there are recurring images that come up in his work of like planes or grids of buildings or goats or crows. And when I've asked and we've spoken about this, he gave me this analogy of Indian classical music, where he said that there is a structure and a frame that always exists in a rigorous way, but then every rendition or performance is an improvisation of the previous one. So in the same way, I guess that explains the recurring motives. These are the details of that work. Then we go on to the dragonfly. That's also something that appears a lot in his work. It may be something from his childhood. And then we go on to the next work, which is the ambassador. This is an image that he probably took while, again, walking around his neighborhood. And I think he's equally intrigued by collectors who own cars like this and have kept them for decades, maybe in the same parking spot, and have never used them. And at the same time, they don't have the heart to give it away. So he took an image of this ambassador that he found and then he sort of proceeds to take the old frames and fragments this image of this very iconic Indian car, and he also draws on the photograph. The final work that I am going to show you today is a very beautiful new work where there, again, images within images. If we go to the detail, you can see that there's also pages of maybe novels or other books. And in my ideal world, we would be standing in my gallery looking at this work in flesh and having this conversation. While I'm very thankful for this opportunity and for your time, I hope we will all do that very soon. Thank you. And now I'm passing it on to Green Art Gallery and Mariam Hosseini.
Thank you, Sunita. Hello, good evening, everybody. My name is Ekaterina, and I'll tell you more about Green Art Gallery Dubai presentation on In Touch on behalf of Yasmina Tassi. For its fifth edition on In Touch, we are presenting Iranian artist Mariam Hosseini, who was born in 1988 in Tehran and currently lives and works in New York. Here on the screen, you can see her new series of paintings called Ghost Watcher. That is also part of her solo show After You, which is on view now at the gallery here in Dubai. And in her work, Mariam explores the concept of ruins in a politicized social space, the tragedy of human condition, through dreamlike dramatic scenes where her characters, a cast between animal and human, find themselves in kind of absurd actions and certain unsettling situations, struggling against confinement, displacement, and subjection to power. And on the screen, you can see this series of small-scale paintings created for the show, and you can notice how it begins with abstracted architecture and more defined character figures, which are her signature warped bodies. And then you can notice a certain development in those paintings where she wanted to create a certain cinematic relationships between 6 different panels, and explore change within movement and time, and also creating a perfect balance between abstraction and figuration. And Mariam, she's an MFA graduate from School of Fine Arts Institute in Chicago, and Bard College in New York. And her recent shows include her participation at Heartbreak exhibition by Rue Maps during last Venice Biennial, and the show Body Armor, which took place 2 years ago at MoMA PS1. And if you have any questions about her work, please do get in touch with us through the website or In Touch platform. And I pass the floor to Peter from Nature Morte.
Okay, thank you, Ekterina. I'm Peter Nagy, and I have a gallery in New Delhi called Nature Mort. And for this episode of In Touch, we are showing a young woman artist named Maya Varadaraj, sorry. And we actually just got these works, and to put it in a sort of brick and regular show in our gallery, but we thought perhaps best to premiere them on In Touch and give the artist a much wider platform. This is the first time we're working with her. Maya is from a family from the city of Coimbatore in South India, in Tamil Nadu, and shifted to California with her family when she was young and is now based in New York City. She's primarily a painter, but she does explore other mediums. And this is a series, an ongoing series of collage works that she's been doing. We just have, I think, 10 or 12 examples. Some came before, and she says it will continue. And as you see, she is working with images culled from popular culture, calendar art, movie posters, religious imagery from Indian culture. She says these are images of generations of feminine identity that she has inherited. These are the images of her mother and grandmother's generations in India that she feels are her cultural baggage. I mean, what she has had no choice in having to claim as the constructing images of her identity. She says she is interested in gestures primarily, and gestures of theatrics, humor, hierarchy, and isolation. So you can see that she sort of cuts apart the source material. What she does is she does reprint all the source material onto digital prints on archival paper and then cuts up those. So these are all unique works, not very large, 18 inches by 18 inches. But as you can see, the original source material would be very old and probably not very archivally sound. So that's why she remakes them so they are good quality. For her, she says the works are an introspection of lived feminist identities. You see, she, as she said, she's very interested in gestures, in motion, in body parts, especially framing certain things. The repeating motif is this sort of the concentric circles tie everything together in the series. And I think we can always see concentric circles as being a target. Perhaps something to aim at, a way to focus is certainly what she's doing by deconstructing the images, by editing them, focusing our attention on certain elements that she wants to highlight. But for me, they also, the circles seem to be almost a hypnotic diagram, how these images seduce us, how they seep into the identity of a young woman who is trying to negotiate this space between her traditional identity of coming from India and now living in the United States. So with that, I will hand it over to the Photo Ink Gallery, also here in New Delhi. Thank you.
Hi, so it's me again. I'm going to be speaking on behalf of Photo Ink and Devika Dolating, who is the gallerist at Photo Ink. Devika couldn't be here, and I apologize, beforehand, because as a gallerist, Devika knows her material best, and she's somebody you should definitely know. So in the 5th edition of In Touch, Photo Ink is presenting work from Roger Ballen's newest book called Roger the Rat, which has been elaborately produced between 2015 and 2020. Roger the Rat is a story that is told in black and white, and it follows the life of part human, part rat creature who lives an isolated life outside mainstream society. Photograph after photograph, we witness scenes that, deconstructed and wrested from everyday gestures, reveal suppressed aspects of human existence. There's also a film on Roger the Rat, which is a 25-minute film that will be released soon. So Roger Ballen was born in the 1950s, and he is one of the most influential photographic artists of the 21st century. His strange and extreme works confront the viewer and challenge them to come with him on a journey into their own minds as he explores the deeper recesses of his own. Roger was born in New York, but for 30 years, he's lived and worked in South Africa. So his work as a geologist took him into the countryside and led him to take up his camera and explore the hidden world of small town South Africa. At first, he explored the empty streets in the glare of the midday sun, but once he made the step of knocking on people's doors, he discovered a world inside these houses, which were to have a profound effect on his work. The interiors of these distinct collections of objects and occupants within these closed worlds took his unique vision on a path from social critique to the creation of metaphors for the inner mind. After 1994, he no longer looked to the countryside for his subject matter, finding it closer to home in Johannesburg. After 2009, the line between fantasy and reality in his subsequent series became increasingly blurred, and he employed drawings, painting, collage, and sculptural techniques to create elaborate sets. There was an absence of people altogether, replaced by photographs of individuals now used as props, by doll or dummy parts of where people did appear. It was a disembodied hands, feet, and mouths poking disturbingly through walls and pieces of rag. The often improvised scenarios were now completed by the unpredictable behavior of animals, whose ambiguous behavior became crucial to the overall meaning of the photograph. In this phase, Roger invented a new hybrid aesthetic, but one still rooted firmly in black and white photography. In his artistic practice, Roger has increasingly been won over by the possibilities of integrating photography and drawing, and he has expanded his repertoire and extended his visual language. By integrating drawing into his photographic and video works, he has not only made a lasting contribution to the field of art, but equally has made a powerful commentary about the human condition and its creative potential. So I think also in Roger's words, he calls these works psychodramas. And yes, I think they're like an amazing, amazing body of work. And there are many more works in this series because, like I said, it all comes from this new book of Roger's that will be out. And I really urge you to reach out to Devika Daulat Singh of Photo in Gallery, who's an incredible gallerist, and explore Roger Ballen's work further. Thank you. And now I'm passing it on to Shrine Empire and Shefali Somani.
Thank you, Sunita. Hi, I'm Shefali Somani from Shrine Empire. And today, for the 5th edition of In Touch, I present the solo of Sangeeta Maiti, which is titled From the Soil. Sangeeta was born in 1989, and she's a trained printmaker who's based out of Kolkata. She did her postgraduate studies from the Faculty of Visual Arts at Ravindra Bharati University. She has won the SEMA Jury Award in 2015 and was a part of last year's edition of the Serendipity Arts Festival. She was also awarded the Junior Fellowship by the Ministry of Culture in 2018. Her works are based on extensive research done over several years in Keonjhar in Orissa and Tripura. Her practice focuses on this post-displacement of indigenous communities as a result of ongoing industrialization in these areas where there has been a erasure of natural forests. Communities that depended on naturally occurring resources of the forest have to work in the mining operations of Orissa or the rubber plantations of Tripura for their livelihood. Their customs, traditional tools, way of dressing have all changed to accommodate a lifestyle that is more suited to their current occupational requirements. The local government since 1960s has aggressively promoted the rubber plantations in Tripura for economic development. Tribal communities from the region have been forced to abandon their traditional farming methods and turn to rubber plantations for sustenance. Now, Sangeeta has been visiting Orissa since she's been a very young girl, and she's seen over time the drastic changes that have been brought to the land and to its people due to mining practices, which has encouraged her to engage more closely with the communities who have been affected. Sangeeta uses media that maintains a close affinity with the materials that are common to the context that she references. For her studies on rubber plantations in Tripura, she works with woodcuts and on paper and serigraphy on pieces of wood. Her works that are based on the mining industry use soil from the region to reference the barrenness of the land that has replaced the beautiful wooded forests. Photo transfers on iron sheets also reference the settlements of the workers out there. And etchings on sheets of copper are depict the topography of the region. The mining industry in Orissa and the rubber plantations in Tripura that deplete the water resources and soil quality have slowly led to the erasure of these communities' way of life and their harmonious coexistence with the forests that they have been custodians of for centuries. Sangeeta brings forward their plight through her works and her collaborative approaches. Thank you. That's all in my presentation. And I'd like to hand it over to Pooja Singhal of Tradition and Beyond.
Hi, good evening. I'd like to introduce the works of my atelier Tradition and Beyond in this edition of In Touch. Tradition and Beyond is an atelier set up by me in 2010, and I launched the first show in 2015. It started with the revival of Pichwais, but very soon went on to intervening in this traditional art form because I just thought I wanted to make it relevant to the audiences today for people who, sort of were into contemporary art, but could not relate to traditional art. So what you're seeing on the slide here right now has been one of my most significant interventions, where I thought of removing color from this very vibrant and colorful art form and what I call the grayscale Pichwais. There was no historical reference to this or no precedence, but for me, I just asked the artists in my atelier to think of black and white photographs. For very long, I kept talking to them about removing color, but somehow, the communication and what was delivered it was very difficult to make them understand what I had in my mind as grayscale. And one day when I thought of just telling them how to look at a black and white photograph, what emerged was this grayscale intervention that you're seeing here. Moving on to the slides, what I've done in this particular edition is bring two very rich cultural heritages together, which is from Japan and India. So Pichwai is very close to my heart because I was born and brought up in Udaipur, and the Pichwai is from Nathadwara, which is a village near Udaipur. My family started business in 1985 with the Japanese. My father started business, and I remember he took us for our first trip back then. And since then, we've second generation is doing business with the Japanese, and my brother visits Japan every month, I think. He's also, all of us being creative, he's very into, exploring all the creative aspects of Japan. And he came back with this roll of beautiful handmade paper, which he really didn't know what he was going to do with. And I said to him, give this to me, because I knew that there was some way I could have combined these two together. for this edition of In Touch, I had these grayscale works, and they were just lying on a table, and they just seemed to talk to each other. There is also a very special story for this. It's not a story, it's a very special emotion that I have for this particular set of works, because if you see in the grayscale, all the ornaments have been done in gold. I lost a very, very dear friend in October, who was also my brother's childhood friend. This gold work came about because he was ordering a certain set of shringars for his wife, who's a Krishna Bhakt. And he said, the one thing she's not going to be able to accept is Srinathji's shringar, which is a very significant aspect of his seva, which is in such dull colors. And therefore he said, I maybe won't take the grayscale works for her and maybe go with the colored. And I called him back 2 days later and I said, you know what, I'm trying, you've set me on a new path, and you're right, the shringar is so significant. And I thought of adding back the touch of gold in the grayscale, and what emerged was this beautiful language. Just before he passed away at the age of 46, he'd visited Japan a couple of times with my brother, and he was a winemaker, and they were going to collaborate with a winemaker in Japan to come up with a new product. So somehow this story sort of all came together, and this set of works is Japanese handmade paper juxtaposed with my grayscale pitchwise with the touch of gold in the ornaments. What you see here is the Japanese paper also had many different colors to it. So here is a juxtaposition of the red and black. So I hope you enjoy seeing it. And now I happily hand over to Roshni Vadera from Vadera Art Gallery. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm very pleased to be presenting to you the work of Madhusudanan, who we are presenting as part of this edition's In Touch. Just to tell you a little bit about the artist first, Madhusudanan was born in 1956 in Kerala, where he studied painting at the Fine Arts College, and then he studied printmaking at the Faculty of Fine Arts in Baroda. Madhusudanan's artistic practice flows seamlessly across various mediums in art and cinema, including painting, video art, as well as feature films. He's very well known as a filmmaker. He's made films in English, as well as Indian regional languages, and 2 silent short fictions. And he's won several national and international awards. His work confronts India's film history, the colonial period, as well as contemporary war politics, and he's deeply concerned with war, colonization, as well as man-made borders. Marxism and Buddhism have been huge influences on his works. I was personally first introduced to Madhusudanan's work at the Kochi Biennale in 2014, which was curated by Jitish Kalat. He had presented a large installation of 90 charcoal drawings, which then went on to be exhibited at the Venice Biennale, which was curated by Okwi and Vizor in 2015, and then a solo project in Newcastle as well. The drawings that we are presenting as part of In Touch are actually spontaneous drawings that he's made in 2020 during lockdown. There is a lot of personal as well as political that's reflected in this set of works. They also offer a glimpse of his childhood memories of shadow puppetry in Kerala. The title Mainakam that he's come up with is actually a figural bird from the Vedas, which when translated, it means mountains have wings. And the myth goes that when Lord Indra cut off the wings of the mountain, the Mainakam escaped and was charged with the duty of guarding the world from demons and evil spirits. And so this he is using actually as a symbol of a savior, as a metaphor for the present refugee crisis in the world. And in considering the displacement of the refugees, he continues to undertake a discourse on colonization and the slow pace of development in colonized nations such as India. Specifically, some of the works in our presentation, the boat, as you see, will keep reappearing in many of the drawings as a symbol for the refugees. And I think this is especially relevant for the Kerala-based artists, where there is a long tradition of boat making. One of my personal favorite works is the Tent of Miracle, which is based on a Brazilian novel written by George Anado called The Tent of Miracle, where the carnival becomes a symbol of shelter, travel, and protection. And there are other symbols like the Noah's Ark going back to the refugee crisis, as well as the fasting Buddha going back to his preoccupation with Buddhism. There's also an interesting work of a comb with hair, which refers to a Russian filmmaker, Andrei Tchaikovsky, who moved to Italy after years of creative conflict in his own country. I do hope that you have enjoyed our presentation today, and we would be very happy to address any questions that you may have. Do put them in the Q&A section, which I'll now be looking at. Our first question is from Udit Bhamri, who says, great work, everyone. When you plan editions for In Touch, do the galleries get together to arrive at a commonality, or is it independent? Yeah, his second question is why Mort and Pratik look so beautiful. So if anyone wants to answer that. Shireen, do you want to address the first part of the question, please?
I just have to read the question again.
When you plan editions for In Touch, do the galleries get together to arrive at a commonality, or is it independent?
I think the choice of galleries that we make, that we made initially, kind of dictated the fact that people were left to their own choices. So no, we don't come, we don't kind of agree or we don't dictate that at all. There isn't that kind of platform. It comes to quite often. It's a really wonderful surprise when PDFs come together as to how homogeneous the works are. I mean, not, you know, there's a kind of way that one gallery speaks to another, but no. So to answer your question, it's not the case. And can we hand the second question back to you, Roshni?
Yes. So Sean Shahani. Oops. Oh, this the second part of the question. Okay, I'm going to move on to Sean Shahani's question for Mrs. Modi. Gallery Ispas, he loves the work of the artist Sharad Sonkosale. What does the title Anhat translate as? And do these black lines down the center of the work represent something intentional? Mrs. Modi, please answer the question.
You have to unmute.
Anhad means going beyond beyond the limit. Had means limit, and anhad means beyond the limit. He talks of the mind. You go beyond the mind. And the lines which you talk about, Shan, it's those lines he's talking about reality, about, you know, those horizontal lines. As we get stuck in the world, we get stuck with our mind. So all these horizontal lines are the thoughts in our mind. We go beyond that. That's what it means. And thank you for your lovely compliment for the artist who we are showing for the first time.
Thank you, Mrs. Modi. Sean also has a question for Peter Naturemort. Does the repetition of the circular form in Maya's work connote anything specific? Love the graphic interpretation.
Well, as I said, I mean, I think the concentric circles always remind us first of target. I think much of the work is, as she said, aiming in on certain aspects of the found figures that she's working as. She sort of, so I think there's it's a focusing device really for her, a way to structure both the positive and negative elements, the found pictures she's using.
Thanks, Peter. Rakesh Kumar is asking, this is in reference to a word being used often in a socio-cultural context. The references to provocation have always been evolving. In the work being showcased today, what is the meaning of provocation in comparison to what we have seen over the years? Pratik, would you like to address this?
Sure. I think, well, I think it's the maybe the responsibility of artists to show a mirror to what our society is. today and has always been the responsibility of the artists. And in reflection of what we see around us today, obviously changes the meaning of what provocation is. I mean, provocation, what it is today, is more contextual to today's times, obviously, and it provokes questions that are maybe uncomfortable. An artist ask questions, and through this presentation, there were many instances where we spoke about artists questioning ideas of war, artists questioning ideas of exploitation and labor ethics, and we spoke about so many different points of provocation. So there are I think provocation is a reflection of the times we are in and how you do the work, and what kind of mirror the artist shows you is really how you answer that question.
There's a question from Radhika as well.
Yeah. I'm just going to address Shika's question first. This is a wonderful initiative. Thanks to all participating galleries and gallerists for the presentations. Thank you, Shika. Has this format opened up any interesting avenues for the gallerists looking into your archives to showcase work here or sharing work so soon after they're created? Perhaps Mott, Ranjana, or Prateek can respond, though open to all. Love the inclusion of international art galleries as well. Mott or Ranjana, would you like to address this?
Sure. I would just add, from our perspective, I think it's quite interesting to think about how works represent themselves online in the digital context, because of course, in many cases, people are going to come to these works only within a digital online setting, rather than seeing the works in physical reality. So trying to assess which bodies of work would be most suitable for this platform poses its own challenges in a way that is obviously very different from presenting the work in the gallery. And I think that's something as gallerists we're all learning on the job, as it were, is how we bifurcate the works we show only online and those works which have a kind of a dual life, online and real life. Ranjana, do you have any thoughts?
Could that question be repeated? I'm sorry.
Shika is asking that has this format opened up any interesting avenues for gallerists to look into your archives to showcase work here or sharing work so soon after they're created?
Yeah, I think I do agree with Mort that the online platform lends itself perhaps to more intimate scaled works and also to works in certain price points, to be quite frank. And we do kind of look deeper at the practices of the artists that we represent to see what could work well. Solo presentations, of course, I've always believed work well. And one also has to kind of keep in mind that it's kind of like it's a collaborative effort. So I guess at some level that plays a role as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Radhika Chopra has a question. Thank you, everyone. The collaboration amongst your galleries is very commendable. Thanks, Radhika. This question is for anyone. As we are all experiencing art online, I'm wondering if this time will have an impact on collection building. How should we use this time to collect art? Well, I mean, I'll just start off by saying I think we're all extremely sort of grateful that the lockdown has actually encouraged a lot of people to collect more art. We've seen an entirely new crop of collectors come up during this time. People are spending more time at home. And so I think collection building is really sort of moving very positively, especially in India. I will let someone else answer the next part of the question. How should we use this time to collect art? Peter, would you like to address this?
I think it's given us all the time to go back to more, old-fashioned techniques of reading about art and spending more time with the books. I know I've been able to go through a pile of museum catalogs that had stacked up over the past 10 years and actually read the essays and spend more time with them. And I think that's probably a good thing. I think it's helped us all slow down. And I've saying, you know, the museum world has become a little inundated now that you can't get into the Louvre for the simple fact that Beyonce and Jay-Z made a video there. People aren't really going to look at the work. So I think perhaps we're getting back to a little semblance of a little more seriousness in the art world because of this lockdown, and that's a good thing.
Thanks, Peter. Radhika also has a question for Isabel. You mentioned that the photographer was recently rediscovered. How large is the archive, and are there other archives of such photographers we could compare this collection to?
Yes, his work is now preserved at the Arab Image Foundation in Beirut. It was discovered on a research trip by Itu Barada, and she discovered this archive, which is like his personal archive. It has over 1,000 works. He was always having two cameras with him, the one that was provided by the Ministry of Information and Communication, one Rolleiflex, and he was also carrying his own Rolleiflex. And these images have been safeguarded because all the rest, as I said, has been destroyed. So the Arab Image Foundation did an amazing job in digitalizing all these works, and then we did a very important work to bring them all to the same format, to a very uniform way of calibrating them to be able to print them in some sort of homogeneous manner. But they are, what you see here are the highlights. He also had a very beautiful book here that won the best book for photography in 2018, I think. And I would say that the 10 works that we present here are very iconic images of his collection.
Thank you, Isabel. Sunita Choraria has 2 questions. We'll just address the last 3-4 questions and then we'll wrap this up. Sunita says, fine pencil work, woodcuts, earthy materials seem to be popular. Is that a new trend? Sunita, Gallerists, would you like to address this, please? Thank you.
Sorry, was it about a new trend or something?
Yeah, is a fine pencil work, woodcuts and earthy materials, they seem to be popular. Is that a new trend?
I mean, I don't think it's a new trend. I think like Mort was saying earlier and somebody else said, there are limitations to this medium in what we can share there. You know, so we also have to think about that there. And as Ranjana said, people have been favoring a certain format of work because it's very difficult to show a lot of large scale work. But no, I don't see any of it as a trend, but I'm happy that there's, you know, weirdly enough, this time it seems like a lot of us almost were talking to each other when we put this together. That wasn't the case, but it looks like that. And I think that's just coincidence.
Thank you. Sunita is also complimenting us on the great platform. Thank you, Sunita. And good to do a Zoom seminar around it. In the absence of India Art Fair coming up with their edition in 2021, do you all imagine scaling this up? Thanks for the encouragement. Sunita, I will ask Priyanka to address this, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunita. I'm not sure we were ever imagining scaling this up. It was supposed to be an intimate coming together of gallerists, and you know, within at least the community that we function in, there are maybe 100 of us, or maybe 50 of us, who are really close to each other, in terms of friendships. We admire each other's programs with certain artists, but the idea was to form many such collaborations, smaller, bigger, and to allow for multiple such tentacles to sort of form their own space, so that we're all agile, we all can move fast, and it's not so much about administrative management, but what we love the most, thinking and looking at the art that we can all work with. Was there a second part to this?
No, I think this is it. I'm just going to address the last question from Seema Mehra, who has the question for Ekaterina. The headless figures in the artist's work to represent minority experiences of temporary assimilation at color at play within her landscapes. I think this is more like a comment, but Ekaterina, if you'd like to address this.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for question, Seema. And of course, she does consider herself as well as a minority, also being Iranian now in New York and not able to travel sometimes and having all the kinds of limitations. So talking about, again, about displacement and subjection to power from different governments. And in terms of colors, well, at the beginning of her career, early in the days, she started with more lighter and pale colors, but then they really developed in more intense and brighter colors. And you can look at her works and the development of her works at our website. And I think it will give you a better idea about the use of her colors, because she used very, very different combination of them.
Thank you. I think this brings us to the end of everything. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. And thank you also for everyone who sent us really encouraging messages on the chat and the Q&A. Abhimanyu, Rina Kalat, Priya Paul, Vijay Choraria, Adam. Thank you all. And we're really happy to have you all join us. And I think that brings us to the end. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, and thank you for joining.
If you're still here, please look at artintouch.in and see the exhibition online.
Thanks, Priyanka. Bye-bye.